Good afternoon, football fans. It is July the 5th, 2021, or as we call it, Scott Fishbowl Day around here. I am Jeff DiMatteo, your host of the first episode of the Gridiron Ratings Dynasty Football Podcast. I'm here with Gridiron Ratings offensive analyst Kyle Carroll. You can find him at Fantasy Reserve. Kyle, how are you?
I'm doing good, Jeff. If it's Scott Fishbowl season, that means we're pretty close to a real NFL season, which is draft season for us. So not much more to be excited about. Just wait for it to get here.
Absolutely. And I hate to disappoint everybody. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the Scott Fishbowl, although I might be making a pick live during the show. We'll see. It'll be second round for the Green Day division. What we are going to talk about, though, is Gridiron Ratings as a site. We're going to talk a little bit about some Dynasty startup strategy, a little bit about how to grade some players, kind of a Dynasty 101 sort of a layout here for you today. Let's kind of dive into some of this. So before we get too deep down the startup rabbit hole, Kyle, why don't we talk a little bit about our background? So when it comes to Dynasty, how long have you been playing? Tell us about some of your teams. Give us a little bit of background on you and kind of what you're all about here for when it comes to Dynasty.
Yeah, so for my very first Dynasty League, I actually picked up an orphan, which is not a great way to introduce yourself into Dynasty. I will say that it's a little bit more difficult to do it that way. But that's going into year 4. And so I have about 7 or 8 Dynasty Leagues that are going into year 3, and then another 3 or 4 that are going into year 2 or that are rookies. So yeah, basically, what I like to do is try out different concepts for Dynasty Leagues. I like to try different strategies. That's the whole point of it. You want to win a championship, of course. But the fun of Dynasty is being able to have complete control over what your team does year after year. And so I've been doing that the last couple of years, not for the intention of doing this podcast, but I feel like I've gained enough knowledge that if I can share some advice and help somebody out, then, maybe someone will avoid the mistakes I did or learn from what worked out for me, hopefully works out for you.
Absolutely. Well, and I know that, last year especially, you were phenomenal at putting out a bunch of player threads, guys, little Dynasty geared, even a little bit of redraft stuff, where you break down individual players and take them all the way through. Hey, here's where they've been. Here's where they're going. This is where they are. Here's how you should be drafting them in Dynasty. And that stuff's phenomenal. So if you guys are out there on Twitter, keep an eye on Kyle's threads. I'm sure he'll be doing more of those as the season progresses. My background when it comes to Dynasty, I've been playing Dynasty only for about 5 or 6 years now. I was always a big redraft keeper kind of a guy. And I got into it through a series of orphans like yourself. Mm-hmm. And my favorite thing was actually taking on some of those dumpster fires and trading my way around and shuffling rosters to try and build contenders. I have a couple I'm really proud of, one of which I've finished second place 4 years in a row. It was a complete dumpster fire when I took it over. But you get to the championship, and you just a little bit of luck, and I haven't quite had it there. But I have a few other ones too, where we're doing contracts and salary caps and all kinds of fun stuff, and full dumpster fire when you take it over. And now that team is probably going to be, right now the second or third strongest roster in the league. But I'm really big into the build out process. The startup draft is great, and you can probably build a great team out of the gate if you're savvy enough. But personally, I like taking a total trash heap and rebuilding and starting over. And that's really where I think the pride for me comes into play. Fantasy in general, I've been playing for, about 25 years now. I don't know if the gray hair gives me away in terms of a little older than some of you guys, but
you're seasoned.
But yeah, that's seasoned. Yeah, that's it. See, yeah, some people will call it seasoned. Some people just call it old. It's okay. But yeah, I mean, I love Dynasty as a format. I can't even go back to redraft at this point. And, that's why we're here, right? We want to talk about Dynasty. We want to talk about how Gridiron Ratings can help you build your Dynasty team. If you've had a chance to hop on our website and take a look at the draft guide that we have up, our draft guide is actually geared to help people with not just Dynasty, but redraft, keeper, the whole bit, whether you're doing half point, full point, or even touchdown only leagues. We have scoring breakdown for all of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that can help, some of your different strategies moving forward. So I'll tell you what, without further ado, why don't we talk a little bit about, some of these strategies, right? So number one, why don't we talk about the concept of a dynasty league? Like what's the definition in your eyes of a dynasty league?
Yeah, I think for a dynasty league, it's as close as you can get to a real life GM. If you've ever, I'm a big fan of Madden. I've been playing Madden since early 2000s, and my favorite mode is the franchise mode. Right, you get to handpick players, you get to make draft picks. That is basically what you're doing, except you're no longer playing against the computer. You're playing against other players who like to do the same thing as you. So it definitely adds a competitiveness to it. Um, the basic concept of it is you get to pick your players, right? Just like redraft, except for the dynasty portion of it, you get to keep those players year after year after year. So you get to decide if you want them on your team or not. You get to decide if you want to go target another player, right? Like, had you targeted some of these other breakout guys, like if you were a big Patrick Mahomes believer when he came out, you're pretty much set for the next 15 years at quarterback, and you don't have to worry about that. And that's something fun that you can have. Like, hey, I like this guy, I picked this guy, now I get to reap the benefits for the next 10 15 years of him being a superstar. Much like redraft, you have the startup picks, but instead of having another startup next year, you keep your players, and then your rookie picks come in. Usually it's about 4 rounds of the rookie crop picks that you get to come for this year. So guys like Trevor Lawrence that are going to be, is he the next Patrick Mahomes, right? Is he the next quarterback for the next 10 to 15 years? Or are you looking at some of these other guys like Trey Lance or Justin Fields? So the concept of a dynasty is basically simple of, I get to be the GM, I get to pick and choose my players, and I get to keep the long-term investments that if you drafted really well this year, you're going to be a contender for many, many years to come.
I love what you brought up there about the rookie quarterbacks, because quarterbacks generally last longer. They take a little bit longer to hit their prime, but they typically last longer than, say, running backs, right? If you're in a dynasty startup or even in a rookie draft right now, who's your number one rookie quarterback? Which one of these 3 guys are you taking?
So that's another thing.
Lance, Fields, or Lawrence.
Yeah, it's another thing of like, how aggressive are you as a fantasy owner, right? Like, if you're more reserved and you want to take the safer play and you want to hopefully have a quarterback for 10 to 15 years, Trevor Lawrence is probably your guy. Even Justin Fields, you can make the argument. If you're like, I want the chance to have the number 1 quarterback in the league, I mean, that's where Trey Lance comes in to play. Now, there is a higher probability that Trey Lance, as fun as he is, and will contend with Lamar Jackson as a league leader in rushing yards if he ever gets the chance to start a full season, he could be out of the league in 6 years, right? Because he's more of a raw project, but the upside is so tantalizing that you're like, man, like this, he could be the next Lamar Jackson. There is, that when you're looking at, the probabilities, he has that probability built into his, really into his legs because he can run the ball so well. And then being with Kyle Shanahan and in that offense, just adds more to the wonder of, well, if he hits, he's going to be that guy. So maybe for me, if I'm starting, if I need to take my very first quarterback and I need someone, I'm probably taking Trevor Lawrence. But Lance is right there. It is really close.
It's a decision I actually have to make here in a few weeks in one of my rookie drafts. I'm a little long in the tooth at quarterback. I have Brady and I have Matt Ryan. I'm kind of like, I probably need to get somebody. Yeah, so I've got thanks to some trades, I have a couple of picks that are in a position where I can take a quarterback. Like, I'm even thinking about the 107. I could take a receiver, but my receiving group is pretty stacked. My running backs are pretty okay. I badly need a quarterback. So I'm like, Lance, Fields. I don't know.
I know more about Fields. If they would just put Dalton on the bench and say Fields is our guy, so we could get a little bit of clarity on him starting week 1, I think people would be more likely to talk about Fields as the 101 over Lawrence. But because of that issue and Matt Nagy, nobody trusts him at this point. He's kind of seems like the third of the pack, even though he might be consideration for 1.
Right. Absolutely. Cool. Well, that was a little sidebar. We'll get back on track
back to the focus.
Yeah. So, like you, I love the NFL style build, the year round kind of maintenance and checking in, building your roster up kind of in your own vision. Right. So the great thing about that is there's so many different rule sets you can play with. And we're not just talking PPR, half point PPR and all of that, but you can build in salary caps like the real NFL. You can build in IDP. You can build in contract links. You can build in all kinds of different parity-based pieces that will allow your dynasty league to emulate the NFL as closely as humanly possible. I've even heard of some leagues drafting coaches. and that's a little out there for me. I haven't gotten that far, but I'm in a few leagues where my big thing is I really like full rosters where you have offense, defense, you're talking 17 to 20 starters, maybe 40 or so on the roster completely, really deep leagues. And that's where you start to see the cream rise to the top on your more savvy players and the guys who are kind of making more of those decisions, putting in the research work. And that's where Dynasty comes in. I mean, it's a smaller part of the industry compared to, say, redraft, but man, your hardcore players are there. And those are the guys that want to put in the time and the effort and the energy. And I think that's why I love it. I'd rather be there because I think we all hate logging into a league. And by week 5, 3 owners have disappeared. And it just kind of ruins the whole balance of the league. So gotta love Dynasty for that reason. When we start taking the strategies into account and the rules and things like that, like how do we start valuing picks? Like when we do a startup, right? Do you want more veteran players to get started, or do you kind of over-index or overvalue those rookie picks? Like what's kind of, tell us about your strategy when you're, just getting started out.
Yeah. So, in your very first Dynasty startup, right? If you've never played one, you're going to want to get this is how you're probably going to think about it. You're going to want as many of those first and second and third round picks as you can get, right? Because you want the top players. You want as many Christian McCaffreys or potential breakout Cam Akers guys on your team that you can get. And the reality of it is the 6th, 7th, and 8th round of those dynasty drafts, those are very valuable picks because while you do want those top end studs that are going to be on your team for years and years and years, you have to have depth in dynasty. And in some of my leagues where I have a team that had Deshaun Watson and Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes as my top 3 picks, I'm figuring out that, while my team is good and will be a contender, the depth of my roster is not very good. It's going to make the playoffs, but when push comes to shove and it's later in the year and injuries are hitting your team, you're going to want that depth. You're going to wish you had Robert Woods on your team, even though he's 29 and is going to go probably in the 7th, 8th, 9th round of dynasty startups because younger players drastically move up the boards. You're going to need those players to help fulfill your team. And so there's a lot of different strategies, but when you're attacking certain positions, like we can talk about running back here, you probably don't want to take an older running back in the first round of your very first dynasty startup. A guy like, Derrick Henry, right? Where we presume he's going to be a top 5 running back, probably top 6, taken in redraft this year. 2 years from now, he may not even be in the top, 14. We could be looking at him more like Todd Gurley or Devonta Freeman the last couple of years, where he's a good running back, but the wear and tear has really hit him. And now you're stuck with a running back that nobody wants. And while he may produce for a couple more years, you have to have the outlook of 3 to 5 years, I think, for a dynasty team because you're keeping this year over year. So there has to be a balance. I don't think you want all rookies because you're leaving way too much up to the variability of rookies hitting. If you went all in, a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster, right? If you went all in on him a couple years ago and you went super young and he was your first wide receiver and he was going almost in the first round of dynasty startup drafts and 1 quarterback leagues, now he's kind of hurting you a little bit. And if you were aggressive on every single pick, picking young studs at that portion of drafts, your team's probably hurting right now a little bit.
Got it. So something you said was older running backs. And I mean, Derrick Henry's 27, right? Well, so is Alvin Kamara and Austin Eckler and some of these other guys, right? So is it kind of factored by age? Are you factoring in total career touches? Like what defines an older back? Because some of these guys like Derrick Henry, I mean, he kind of got started a little later, right? Like he's not a guy who's been in the league 7 years. He's only had 4 big years here in terms of touches. Like take us a little deeper down that rabbit hole in terms of how you're going to evaluate specifically that running back position.
Yeah, it's something you and I have talked about a lot, right? And we're trying to figure out, when is the breaking point for a running back? And the more we kind of start digging, the more we see maybe it's not specifically age, but more of career touches and how you're getting those touches, whether it's, ground when you're talking about running the ball versus catching a pass, right? Which is a reason why Alvin Kamara, who we've talked about a lot and who you're a big fan of, for the specific reason of, look, all of his touches have come through the air. He's taking less hits per game than Derrick Henry is, who's getting 22, 25 carries and taking it up the middle and getting hit by 340-pound defensive linemen almost every single play. except for the ones he breaks for 80-yard touchdowns. But that's part of the variability of the position. So I think there needs to be a balance. Another guy, Austin Eckler. I love Austin Eckler, but he did get started late. He only had one full year. Well, Melvin Gordon missed the first few games of the season, and he kind of kept the fringe starting job. He got a majority of that last year. He only played I think 6 games. He got hurt a couple times. So the wear and tear on him, while he is, I believe, 26 years old, he's probably going to have another 2 to 3 years of solid production going into his age 28, 29 season. And the way that these running backs get passes versus other running backs who run the ball on the ground, that does matter a lot. And we're starting to see more and more of that as more of these pass catching running backs, a guy like James White, right? Who, if Tom Brady was still there, he would probably still be a very good running back because he isn't wearing down. He's catching passes through the air. Now Tom Brady's gone and there's not a quarterback there to throw him as many passes, but we could have seen 6+ years of monster PPR, not monster, but, solid PPR production from a running back like that. So it'll be interesting to see how Alvin Kamara, and you're looking at Jameis Winston versus Taysom Hill. I think there's definitely some merit in taking, we talk about the age of maybe 25 years old, right? Where you probably want as many running backs under the age of 25 that you can, but I think you have to take into account, how long have they been doing it? When did they break out? And Austin Eckler and Alvin Kamara are two guys that, because they kind of broke out a little later when you're talking about Austin Eckler, they're going to have a few more years worth of running back one value versus someone like maybe Zeke, right? Who got a lot of his on the ground early in his career, and he's going into his 5th or 6th year.
Right. Yeah. And I think I'm right there with you. We've had plenty of off-air discussions about that kind of thing. And so far in the research that we've done, and this is just to kind of give a little more context for our viewers and listeners, is that we look at a player like Zeke specifically. In his career, he has over 1,600 touches. And what we've found is that it's not so much age directly, but it's a certain number of touches within a certain time frame can A, lead to injuries, or B, lead to an earlier drop-off. So in the last 5 years, you're talking about Zeke has 1,638 or something touches. I'd have to go back and look at the exact figures. But then Kamara has under 1,000. His efficiency, especially, near the goal line, is off the charts. He's one of the most efficient players in the history of the league. And you start to compare these guys and you say, well, you can't lean on efficiency. I'm like, well, you can when he does it year after year after year after year.
Yeah.
And Kamara, I'm not as worried about him with Winston or with Taysom Hill. I think there are going to be some growing pains, but there's going to be plenty of targets in the offense, and they're going to have to get him involved in the passing game just to keep Michael Thomas freed up, because there's no other real passing targets in that offense unless people are really dialed in on Troutman, the tight end. And I like him, good-looking prospect, but to say he's going to come out and be the number 2 in that offense seems unlikely. So I think we can still expect plenty of looks through the air for Kamara. And that's going to help him have those one-on-one matchups in a tackling situation against a 180 to 200-pound corner versus, say, a 240-pound linebacker. Yeah. And those hits are very different on the human body. So, yeah, I think, Derrick Henry, great player. He is a different dude. I mean, we're talking, every bit of, 245 pounds. What is he, 6'3"? He is a hoss. If anybody can take the punishment, it's probably him. And that's actually, we spelled that out right in the draft guide in his analysis. But every other player that we've researched, including guys like Christian McCaffrey last year, that exceeded, I believe the number was 950 touches over the course of a 3-year period, ended up missing time in the 4th year due to some kind of injury. Because the human body just has limitations, right? Henry's the kind of guy that could break that mold, but man, that gives me pause when I start seeing that, and I see it consistently throughout the last, say, 10, 12 years. It really does bother me. I would definitely be, if I'm going to start up right now, probably skipping Henry, and I would probably take an Eckler, or I'd just go wide receiver, and I would go with a different type of build, but that's just me, and we can talk more about different strategies, probably in the next segment here. But what other things do you run into? Like, so let's just say hypothetically, you're sitting there at the 110 in your startup, and you get offered, I don't know, 2 or 3 picks in a startup draft. Let's just say you get offered a 3, a 4, and a 5 for that pick. Is that the kind of trade you're interested in? Like, what kind of trade are you looking for to move down to build that depth you were talking about?
Yeah, for me, if you can get as many of those undervalued 4th, 5th, 6th round picks without sacrificing at least getting some top end base talent, if you got a 3, 4, 5 for my 110, I probably wouldn't want to move down that far. I would probably still want to be able, I would maybe move to like a later second. If it was an early third, if it was like the 302, yeah, then I'm definitely, if I said I could got the 302, the 411, and the 502, I will 100% move down for that, because you're still going to have a lot of top tier talent that you want to build the base around your team. But when you can get multiple of those mid-round picks for a guy that really wants to go up there and really wants to get Dak Prescott, for if you're in a super flex league, like if I really want that good quarterback, then yeah, take the sacrifice on missing out on your player and build that depth, because you're still going to get top end talent in the 3rd and 4th round of these drafts. And so you're going to have people that always want to trade up. You're going to have people that are always going to want to trade back, and you're going to have people that will trade startup picks for rookie picks. And while that sounds like a good idea to hoard all the rookie picks for your 2022 NFL draft, if you end up in a draft like this one, which I think we can both kind of agree it's early, but seems a little underwhelming compared to maybe the last few years, you're going to be in a world of hurt, because you're going to have no veteran present on your roster, and you're going to have a bunch of rookies, and you're going to be really hoping that a guy like Kadarius Toney and Terrace Marshall break out the way that we've seen guys like Terry McLaurin, right? Like he was a later 2nd round rookie pick, early 2nd round when the hype kind of got around. You're going to have to hit those picks. And so do what you can to maximize your value by moving back from the 1st round, because people are going to be antsy to move up to get their player, and take advantage of those situations. So yeah, for the 110, I think I would move. If it was an early 3rd for the 3, 4, 5, I'm taking that all day. Just too much value.
Perfect. So now let's just say we're making trades, right? We're moving around, we're shucking and jiving. We talked about value for running backs and kind of how that can dissipate in 3 years, and talking about moving around the draft board. Who are we moving for? We talked about running backs a little bit. I know something I've done in the past is I actually under-index running back on my startup draft, and I really try to leverage them in a rookie draft, because I really want as many years as humanly possible with my running backs, because their kind of prime of their career is almost day one. What do you think? Do you like to go out and maybe over-index, say, wide receiver? If you're sitting there with your second, 2/3, 2/4, or whatever that looks like, how do you feel about going out and grabbing like 3 or 4 wideouts, or maybe a couple of wideouts, a quarterback who's younger with upside, and maybe a tight end? Like, do you ever experiment with any of those kinds of odd builds?
Yeah. So I don't want to say zero running back, because that's like taboo, I think. But in dynasty drafts, I will prioritize getting an elite tight end, because they're really hard to come by. As you see, we have 3 this year, and then it's a bunch of whatevers that we hope break out. I will prioritize running back last, because the wide receiver talent at the top lasts so much longer. I'd like to bring up some ADPs here for you, just to let you know about the wide receivers. It's going to be real quick.
Hit me. I'm excited.
Here we go. This is 2018. It's only 3 years ago. Here are the top 12 wide receivers, and let me know if you think these guys are still relevant today. Antonio Brown was number 1. DeAndre Hopkins, Odell Beckham, Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams, A.J. Green, Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, T.Y. Hilton, Stephon Diggs.
Man, I feel like if we would have read them slower, I could have done like thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to get through these because we also got the running back list. Now, I think you would both agree with me on this, that most of those wide receivers outside of Antonio Brown and his situation and A.J. Green and T.Y. Hilton, all of these wide receivers are very relevant to this day.
75% of them are still relevant.
Easily.
9 out of 12. So that's
here's that same running back list. You have Todd Gurley, yikes, Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, Zeke, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley. So you had a run of 3 running backs that are still very relevant there. I think that was Barkley's rookie year. And then it goes to Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, Melvin Gordon, Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, Devonta Freeman. And so if you're looking
at that group is still relevant.
Yeah. So you're telling me the hit percentage of a 3-year to 5-year window is 75% to 50%, which this is just the top 12 picks, but these are the consensus, right? Like these are who the industry believes will be the best running back or wide receiver for multiple years to come. And so your hit rate is drastically declining when you're looking at the long-term window. And especially when you're looking for a championship, like if you didn't trade Todd Gurley that Super Bowl year that the Rams went, and there was that offseason a rumor about injury, you were caught holding the bag. And he goes to Atlanta, has 6 or 8 good games because he scored a touchdown almost every single game. And those last 6 or 8 weeks, he killed your team. So I just think that when you're looking at these wide receivers versus the running backs, I'm going to target these wide receivers early in drafts. And when we start getting to this 3rd, 4th round picks, you're going to have guys that are going to go later, like J.K. Dobbins, right? Someone who is not in that top tier of elite running backs, but is someone who's going to go later between probably picks 12 to 24 out of the running back group, who is a second-year player. You're going to have got these other rookies like Travis Etienne, who this year doesn't have a good-looking window, but 3 years from now could probably be viewed as a top 8 running back because he's going to be tied to a good quarterback and he's going to be tied to a good offense. So there's still value to have at these running back positions. But 3 years from now, you could be, if you started with J.K. Dobbins and Travis Etienne, you could have 2 top 15 running backs and pair that with a guy that if you went early, if you still had Tyreek Hill, if you went Tyreek Hill in the 1st round and paired him with these 2 running backs, you're still going to have Tyreek Hill in 3 years. If you would have went Todd Gurley 3 years ago and Le'Veon Bell, if you had the 1st and 2nd overall pick and you attack those running backs, they're no longer on your team. They're not even, They're probably retiring this year. So I think that's just how you have to look at it from a non-aggressive approach. It feels safe, but the safe play is the better play long-term.
I did a mock recently. It was a dynasty startup mock. We were just we were bored and needed something to do. So we were screwing around, did a mock draft. And I ended up, moving out of the 1st round. And I had acquired a 2nd, a 5th, and a 6th.
Nice.
And what I walked out of that 1st round, after I came out of there, 2nd round, I took Patrick Mahomes. And I paired him up with, I think I actually landed Devontae Adams because I took Adams at the 201 is the way it worked out. And then I had Mahomes. And then I took Darren Waller.
Wow.
So I walked out with that trifecta right out of the gate because everyone in front of me was going running back, running back, running back, running back. Now, I didn't land a running back until much later. I think my number 1 running back was like James Robinson. But I ended up with like Robinson, Trey Sermon, because the rookies were blended into this. There was no separation.
Right.
But I still felt really good. And again, I'm not a 0 RB guy, so I don't want people to get the wrong impression. Like, I don't really care if you like 0 RB or 0 wide receiver or whatever your preference is. I'm all about you just taking the positional advantage when it presents itself. If drafting the 5th running back is going to give you the positional advantage you need on your roster over your opponents every week, then take him. But if it's going to be the number 1 quarterback or the number 1 tight end, number 2 tight end, whatever that looks like, number 3 wide receiver, all of those individual points start stacking up when you build advantages at your wide receiver 1 or your quarterback 1 or your running back 2 or whatever that looks like. So I guess that's more, what I think. But when I started digging through those builds, I was like, man, this is really unorthodox to say the least. But man, I really love the way it looks because I'm going to beat the crap out of you at quarterback. I'm going to beat the crap out of you at tight end. I'm going to beat you badly at wide receiver 1. And then I'm going to get killed at running back, but all the other points I've acquired and all the other positions I've won, it offsets it, and I still feel good about the roster. So, yeah, I think that build where you're talking about those wide receivers, how they last longer, the tight ends, the quarterbacks, those are definitely guys worth over-indexing in Dynasty. And then if you happen to be playing like IDP and you're getting into some of those spaces, same kind of thing, right? Because those players can also provide longer-term value, whether it be, getting an elite linebacker, a Darius Leonard type guy or something like that. It's fantastic. There's a lot of different ways you can go to build your team out. I think that pretty much is a wrap on kind of the startup versus rookie picks, but I think what we need to kind of dig in a little bit deeper on, spend the last few minutes of the show here is, let's talk about age comparisons at different positions. Quarterbacks, we'll start there. It seems like everyone's playing until they're 40 now.
Yeah.
What's your bailout date? Like, what's your bailout age at quarterback? Like, is there one?
I don't think there's a bailout age specifically because you look at a guy like someone who I thought I was really going to be out on, and it may be true, is someone like Matt Ryan. Like, I feel like this is kind of the year that I want to bail out on Matt Ryan. But if this team does well and he's not going anywhere this year, he might not be going anywhere next year with that contract. So I think more specifically for quarterbacks, if the play is still good, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, the play is still good and the team is in a position where they're still competing, I think you can ride out those running back or those quarterbacks. I don't think there is any age factor until they start getting closer to, I'd probably say 37, 38. Because most of these guys that are older now, like a Ben Roethlisberger who got injured, his career is kind of coming down, but his was a major UCL injury. That's something that we haven't really seen with the quarterback position. It was a super outlier injury. So, you look at a guy like Ryan Tannehill, right? Like he feels young because he's playing so well. His career didn't start off great, but the guy's like 32, 33 years old. Like, are you ready to sell Ryan Tannehill at 33? I'm not. I think he's going to have a good few more years that you can maximize on the capital. It kind of depends on, if you're able to get these younger running back crops. Like, if you can move Ryan Tannehill and some change to go get some of these guys like a Dak Prescott, I'm all for it. But don't have to overprice yourself to go get a quarterback because you're scared of age, because these guys are still useful. Players like Kirk Cousins, they're still useful. Matthew Stafford's older, still useful. Like, these guys are going to help you win leagues. I just think if you have what you have and you're going for a championship and you're content, go for it. If you're looking more towards a rebuild, I'm okay trying to price yourself out of these older quarterbacks because they still hold a lot of value. But the age factor, I don't really think there is one. I think it's a play factor, which is kind of, weird to say, but if they're playing at a high level, they're going to continue doing it, and they may end up like Tom Brady at 42 years old or whatever he is now.
Well, I don't think they're all eating avocado ice cream and drinking avocado tequila or whatever he was having at the Super Bowl party. But let's use Tannehill as an example. So I think on a lot of dynasty rosters, folks that are probably going to view, listen, or watch this show, they already have a team. He's probably their QB2 in a lot of cases, right? You probably weren't drafting him in the last 4 years to be your QB1 or acquiring him as such. Based on the hype of adding Julio, you got AJB there, you get 2 top flight wide receivers, arguably. Mm-hmm. Would you be willing to try and sell him off for an early enough rookie pick, or maybe pair him with a pick to go up and get yourself one of the rookie quarterbacks? Say make a play for a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields, if he's going to be at the back end of the first or late, an early second perhaps in your rookie draft. Is that a move you're willing to make?
I'm completely okay with making that move. It really, everything completely depends on how your roster is built to compete or not compete this year. Because if my roster was built to compete and he was my quarterback 1, I'm probably not moving him this year, right? Like, I want the end game of Dynasty is to win championships and to win as many as you can in a short span of however that long that league can stay together. But if you're a fringe playoff team and he's your quarterback 2 and you got Tom Brady, like you mentioned earlier, you're in a situation kind of like that, and you need someone that that's going to have success for 10 to 15 years, I'm completely okay with doing whatever you can to go get that top pick, pair Tannehill with the pick, move up in your drafts to the 102 or 103, whatever you need to do to put yourself in that position to get Fields, Lance, or Lawrence, because you're going to want that security long term. But like I said, I wouldn't, if he was my quarterback 1 for whatever reason, if it was him and if you had him and Tua, right, and you're like not sure if Tua is going to work out and you really need to have that security of a quarterback 1, I'm completely okay with keeping Tannehill and just seeing if you can win the championship, because he's going to have a good year this year. I think we can agree on that. But his value has never been higher. I will say that.
I try to sell the shiny new toy. I'm really big on when the narratives and the hype gets really moving, and that train's just steaming downhill uncontrollably. I try to maximize on that speed and that excitement. And so for me, I think I'd actually be actively selling Tannehill, especially if somebody is pumped about all of his tools, because that's still a low volume offense that a lot of people aren't going to be that involved with. But it's curious to get a different point of view on it. And so, and I think when you mentioned like the 102, 103, you're talking about super flex drafts. If you're in a single QB, those quarterbacks are probably going a little later, back end of the first, early second.
Late first round.
just to make the delineation for anybody out there who's unsure. We're not advising you to pop up to the 102 in your rookie draft to grab a quarterback. No. But cool. Okay, well, so we talked about running backs already, so we'll skip them. But how about wide receivers? Like, where's kind of that, have you found kind of that drop off? Is it like an age? Is it, a usage thing? Because, I mean, it seems like Julio, when he's on the field, still seems great, right? And he's a little older. But then we've seen guys like Brandon Marshall in the past where he was amazing and just dropped off a cliff completely. Like, what's your take? Like, how do you try to, how do you decide when to sell on those guys or when to pass in a startup?
Yeah, I think when you start getting to for wide receivers, age 29-ish season, this is when you're like, okay, how many years of elite production, if you're talking a guy like a Julio Jones, do I have left? And someone who was paired with Julio Jones' entire career is AJ Green, right? Now, depending on whatever side, if you were an AJ Green believer and you were a Julio Jones believer and you took the same paths, one of you is still succeeding with the dominant wide receiver, hopefully, in Tennessee. And the other one was caught holding the bag again. And I think what we've seen is that elite athleticism for bigger wide receivers 100% matters. You talk about Brandon Marshall, he was a beast on the field. But when it kind of fell off towards the end of his career, I think we've noticed that the speed that a wide receiver doesn't have really holds them back at the end. You talk about a guy like Randy Moss or Terrell Owens, they could probably go out there and play today because they were elite athletes, right? They were big in size, but they had elite athleticism that helps you carry over the course of your career. So you look at someone like Julio, which I believe he's 31, because of his elite athleticism, as long as he's healthy, he's going to be okay. AJ Green was more of a big-bodied possession guy who was just younger in his career, was able to get down the field. But we've noticed with Joe Burrow, who I don't think is a bad quarterback, but the guy was at like sub 60% catch rate last year. He had like 120 targets or something and had like 60-something catches. Like, I think when you're looking at wide receivers like that, when you start getting to age 28, 29 season, you need to start assessing them. And we could see someone like Kenny Golladay, right? Like, he could be like, which route is he going to be taking in the next couple of years, especially if Daniel Jones doesn't develop as a quarterback? Is he going to be more of that Brandon Marshall, AJ Green, where we love his talent, we think he's a big body guy that catches touchdowns, but he's not super athletic to the point of Julio Jones? Or is he going to be able to sustain his athleticism towards like the end of his career and work well into his 30s? So those are kind of how you need to identify those wide receivers, because these slot guys that we're seeing a ton of nowadays, they still do fine. I mean, you can look at like a guy like Cole Beasley, who had a pretty good year last year. He's been in the league for a while. He was still very relevant for the Bills and helped them in PPR leagues. And I don't think someone like that, outside of his shenanigans on Twitter, is going to go away, because he can just straight up catch the ball and he works the slot. And so it's different when you're a big-bodied outside wide receiver, and that's kind of all you've done for your career. You end up like Brandon Marshall, who was having so much success, and then one season it just wasn't there. He was just done.
Got it. Yeah, I've always kind of been the guy who prefers maybe not small receivers, but smaller, just because I feel like they last longer. I look at Antonio Brown. He's a smaller type guy, and he's still effective, right? Chris Godwin, I think, is a prime example of a player that I think can be effective long term. And I really like just his quickness. He's got long speed. He kind of does a little bit of everything really well. He's not great at any of it, but he's just really good at everything. And that's the kind of guy I think has a long sustained career. I know we're actually working on some stuff behind the scenes to help try and better assess that. And hopefully by this time next season, we'll have some interesting tools to give you guys a sense of when to sell. And, that'll be, I think, a big differentiator for a lot of your dynasty rosters. But I know we're running a little low on time here, so why don't we shoot through tight ends really quick? They generally last a little bit longer than receivers and running backs and some of these positions. But do you have a bailout point on tight ends, or do you have maybe like when do I get involved, right? Because rookie tight ends are usually terrible. And then when do you bail out? Like, what does that look like? Because tight ends are kind of funky.
Yeah, I feel like we haven't really had. We don't have a long enough track record, I think, in the NFL of like elite tight ends. And when does it fall off? Because you look at a guy, I think personally my favorite tight end of all time was Tony Gonzalez. The dude played until he was ancient, right? And he still had very solid production for multiple years. Well, I think he was like 37, 38. I mean, you can fact check me on that one, but the guy was like was old as dirt. It was still like solid production. Then you look at a guy like Gronk, who was dominant for multiple years. He retired at age like 29. So
and then he came back.
Yeah, and then he came back, which he shouldn't have retired. But, injuries caught up with him, and I think that's a little bit of a difference. If you don't have an elite tight end, Kelsey, I'll still put Kittle in there. Darren Waller was just kind of a randomness that blew up that has always been an athlete, and I think I always had hopes for him, but he had some off-the-field issues that kind of kept him, and then he landed in the perfect situation because I don't think he could do what he was doing if it wasn't because of Derek Carr, like in every situation. But sure. Derek Carr loves that tight end position and has been feeding him. And so Darren Waller has been capitalizing. He's going to work himself into a big contract. But the landscape right now for tight ends, if you're in a startup draft, you have your pick of the litter. And good luck trying to identify one because they are all young. They're all athletic. A lot of them have high draft capital. But tight ends just take 3 to 4 years to develop, which is it took Kelsey a couple years. Gronk took about 2 years. Gronk was pretty much good from the beginning. Him and Aaron Hernandez were like good to go for that entire Patriots run. But if you look at a guy like George Kittle, his second, third year in the league, he really broke out and was breaking tight end records. Travis Kelsey took a couple years, was breaking tight end records. And even a guy like Jimmy Graham, who I think we all make fun of now, but at the time when it took him a couple years, but after those 2 years in, he was one of the best receiving tight ends in the game because he was more of a receiver than a tight end. And that's where you kind of get into the situation of Kyle Pitts, right? Where it's, well, there's no Julio Jones, so there's all these vacated targets, and is that going to matter? And he's basically a wide receiver. I think we all expect him to be more of a wide receiver than a tight end, but he has that tight end labeled into his position. So Kyle Pitts, I think, is going to be fantastic for the history of tight ends, but may disappoint this year. And I think we both can kind of agree on that the expectation is just, he's some people's like top 3 tight end at this point. And I think we both can see the possibility, but we've seen the history of tight ends. Right. Evan Ingram's best season was his rookie season, and he was like the greatest rookie tight end of all time. And I don't think the dude cleared 1,000 yards. So like
963 yards.
Yeah,
or
and so the expectations for tight end are different. You have guys like Noah Fant, who we hope that he gets an upgrade at quarterback eventually. As a Broncos fan, I hope so. TJ Hawkinson's looking to be well over 100 targets again this year. Dallas Goedert, is Jalen Hurts going to be a good quarterback? So, there are so many tight ends here that you can project to be they're going to make the leap. And the truth is there's just there's a lot more barriers for them than there is for maybe these wide receivers and running backs. So
I'll tell you what, why don't we do a quick game of either or?
Oh, okay. We didn't practice this off the air, so this is like
first reaction.
Raw, like pick. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. First reaction. Hawk or Fant?
Hawk.
Okay. Hawk or Pitts?
Pitts.
Okay. Pitts or Jonnu Smith?
Pitts.
Okay. Pitts or Hunter Henry?
Pitts.
Okay. Pitts or Irv Smith, who could have a bigger role?
Yeah, okay. I think I still Pitts.
And Pitts or Goddard?
Pitts.
Pitts or Hawk?
I don't want to pick. Because I see the Pitts, it's taken a little bit, but Pitts is making me feel the way I felt about Noah Fant, where I saw that 170-yard play and I was like, this dude just needs 4 targets a game. That's not a lot. Over the course, just 3 catches, 4 targets, that's all he needs to get one big play. And if he does that 5 times this year, Pitts, if Pitts just breaks off 5 40-plus touchdowns, which is super easy for him to do, he's going to be top 5, top 4. He's going to sneak in there because that's all it's going to take. He doesn't even need to be a volume play. But I know Hawkinson's going to be the volume play.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we have Pitts as the tight end 4 in the draft guide. I'd have to take a look. That draft guide, by the way, has 500 players in it, IDP and offense. No kickers because they're not people. And obviously we're just kidding, right? And no team defenses or anything like that. But written analysis on 500 players, offense and defense. I believe we threw Pitts in there with that offense with Matt Ryan. Tight end 4. We've got him projected pretty well, especially in the wake of the Julio trade and all of that. So if you have the chance, take a look at that. The draft guide is available. It is $40. If you found us because of the pod, I want you to DM us, either DM me at NFL_DiMatteo or DM Kyle at Fantasy Reserve and say, hey, heard you on the show, want to pick up the draft guide. We'll get you a deal on one. We'll go ahead and we'll knock 25% off of one for you. But you got to DM us. That's how we're going to know you found us on the pod. So we're going to wrap this thing up. We try not to let these shows go too long. We don't want to lose any folks, once they start dialing in here. So any final notes, Kyle, any parting wisdom when it comes to drafting Dynasty?
At the end of the day, it's your team. So draft your guys. You want to be happy at the end of your draft. Be like, man, I really wish I would have traded up and got Patrick Mahomes. Well, if that's how you feel, then go do it. Draft your players.
Yep. Be happy with your roster. Have fun. The whole idea behind fantasy is having fun. Don't let it get you down. Don't let, not getting your guy get in the way, because good news, you can always trade for players after they're drafted. That's the great thing about fantasy, right? Unless of course you're in some leagues that don't allow trades, like, FFPC World Championships or fantasy, or, the fantasy, what is it? The Football Guys World Championship, Scott Fishbowl. Once you draft, that's it. You're on your own. But with that, check us out at gridironratings.com. We're getting ready to make a few adjustments to the homepage for you. Check out the draft guide. It does come as a $40 retail value. You can pick it up on our Iron Man subscription plan or buy it outright. If you have any questions about it, feel free to DM us on Twitter at NFL_DiMatteo, at Gridiron Rating, or at Fantasy Reserve. We'll be happy to help you any way we can. We look forward to bringing you a fresh episode once a week from now through August to help you through all of your startup and all of your dynasty and all of the trade questions you might have. So until next time, happy drafting, happy Scott Fishbowl Day, and take care.